Please be seated. What's the difference between holy fear, the fear of encountering God, and regular fear, the fear that we feel when we encounter things in this world? I mean, they're certainly related, aren't they? I think at base in both of them you can hear a desperate note of self-preservation. Both Isaiah and Peter know that it is not possible for a human to look on God and live. Woe is me, I am lost, for I have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And that's similar, I think, to the stomach-churning sensation I get every morning when I open my news feed and I'm confronted with the fear that everything I once knew and trusted is rapidly collapsing, and that people that I know and love are being threatened and traumatized. And that if I allow those constricting thoughts to go far enough, I know that my own existential threat lies at the root of it, the fear that I won't survive. But fear generated by an encounter with God and the fear generated by the politics of cruelty are not ultimately the same. There is a subtle but essential difference that I think we must pay close attention to. Fear in general causes us to contract, doesn't it? To close in and self-protect, to constrict and limit our options, to shut down and isolate ourselves from friends and communities, from the things that really are necessary for our survival. And worldly fear, fear of things in this world, maintains this constricting, contracting, isolating course. It's like the famous Ouroboros, the serpent that devours its own tail. It continues constricting and constricting and constricting until there is very little left. Fear of God also causes us to constrict, to draw in or avert our eyes at the very least, but there's a difference, isn't there? You see, the endless constriction generated by worldly fear creates a closed circle, in effect a prison, an endless cyclic repetition, samsara as it's known in some traditions, from which there is no easy escape. But that's not true with holy fear. Because even at the most fearful, God's circle is never completely closed. God always provides an opening, a crack. And that opening is what transforms a closed circle into a spiral, into a path that draws us ever closer to the source, to our source, to God. And we see this in today's readings. Isaiah and Peter offer us glimpses of individuals caught in cycles of real and imagined worldly fear and being offered a way out. Isaiah lived during a cataclysmic period of transition from one leader, King Uzziah, to another, his son, King Jotham. And Jewish scholars tell us that while Uzziah was pretty good at keeping the kingdom safe from the more powerful kingdoms that surrounded them, he also put in charge a clique of rich nobles, most of whom were completely unfit for the offices that they held, and yet he gave them power to do whatever they pleased, whether it was legal or not. And so while a very few enjoyed a great deal of prosperity during his reign, the poor and the marginalized, were oppressed and suffered greatly. Now, we don't know what Isaiah's status or position in this world was, but it's interesting that he never tries to separate himself from his context. He doesn't say, "Oh, send me, I'm not like them at all." No, he says, "I am a person of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." We might say that he is aware of his complicity. Now, Peter, and I admit this is speculation, but after reading this many, many times, I'm starting to wonder, what if Peter is simply not a very good fisherman? I mean, what if being out all night and not catching anything wasn't unusual? What if that was normal? And so when confronted by this stranger and this miracle catch, I have to wonder if a bunch of self-loathing, self-deprecating tapes didn't start playing in Peter's head. "Oh God, I am just the worst. Dad was right. I'll never amount to anything. I can't do this." Now, again, I don't know whether that happened to Peter or not, but I know that it does happen to people. It's easy to get trapped in stinking thinking, isn't it? So Isaiah is caught in a cycle of, I'm part of the problem, there's no way out, we're all doomed. Peter is caught in a cycle of, I'm no good, I can't do anything right. And left alone, that worldly fear may very well start to consume them. But thankfully, they are also able to see God. And God always provides an opening. God offers them a way out with a piece of flaming coal to blot out the offense and an obscure joke that never ever survives translation. Catching people, or I will make you fishers of men, apparently it really means something like, from now on, you'll be capturing human beings so they don't die. Flaming coals and obscure jokes aside, they may not make any sense to us, but that's fine. They don't have to make sense to us because they made sense to Isaiah and to Peter. They provided that crack, that glimmer, that tiny sliver, and that was all God needed to reach them and transform that constricting circle of fear into an expanding spiral of grace. That tiny crack is all that it takes to shift Isaiah from "woe is me" to "send me," and to transform Peter from a not very good fisherman into the rock upon which the church is built. Now, neither one of them at this point can know or see all of the twists and turns that this path will ultimately lead them on. Just like we cannot know where we will be called when we start to follow that glimmer of light that we see. But they do know, and we also know, that that expanding spiral will ultimately lead them to the true treasure that they have always sought, to the true home that they have always longed for. Fear can be all-consuming, but it doesn't have to be an end point. Fear can also be a starting point, because God always offers a way out, always provides a crack where that divine light can shine through. So whenever we start to feel afraid at all of the things that are going on in the world, what we really have to do is look for that God-given way out. And look, I know that that's challenging. I know that that is not always easy, because that crack that lets the light in is very often in the last place we want to look, isn't it? It's often buried within our vulnerabilities. It's often hidden amidst our shame and our deficiencies and our inabilities and our failures. But that's where God always seems to meet us, in our weakness, in our smallness, in our doubts, in our lack of faith, and yes, even in our fear. So don't be afraid. Look for that opening. No matter how dark it gets, look for that light and trust it and follow it and let God lead you to where you need to be. Amen.